Welcome to the Smashville Fantasy Football Podcast. I'm your trade addict host, Andrew Banta, joined by our analyst who swears he can predict the future, Will Ott. Get ready for armchair analysis, friendly banter, and a whole lot of fantasy fun. Welcome back to Smashville Fantasy Football. We've had a week hiatus here, had a major election, so we're feeling all sorts of feelings about that.
It took me a long time to tally up the votes. There was a request for a recount. I know some of you have bad feelings about that, but I can't control that. We extended our election for a couple days. By now, if you didn't get it in, I'm sorry.
We are a pure democracy here, though. I mean, unlike the United States. So, yeah, don't have to worry about electoral college or anything like that. Only have to worry about Will's counting skills.
I understand that about half of you are going to be somewhat upset, and the other half are going to be happy with the results. In third place, we had kicker Brandon Aubrey.
I hate it when a third party skews the results like that.
I know, right? Like it could have been. We could have
legitimate contenders here.
It might have been a game changer. Number 2 was Lamar Jackson.
Okay, I can.
And then our winner, Derrick Henry. I'm happy about these election results. I wanted to make sure that I counted twice, so then I could not be disappointed one more time.
Derrick Henry, I think, is a great choice. I figured it was going to be a two-person race with Lamar Jackson and Derrick Henry, and it was. Brandon Aubrey was the only other vote getter. Aubrey's my kicker, but it wasn't me.
I think it was the person who drafted him.
Derrick Henry, just to recap, had 10 touchdowns versus 1 fumble and 946 rushing yards. How did he actually perform this past week? He added another touchdown to his total. So 68 yards. Does that put him over the 1,000 mark? What I said?
And then also the week before that, he had 106 yards, 2 touchdowns.
Oh yeah, that's right. Okay, yeah. So well over the 1,000 mark. He's rolling. He's doing great. Lamar Jackson is also rolling for his part. To recap his couple weeks here. Week 9, he had 3 touchdowns, 0 interceptions, 280 passing yards. Week 10, even better, 4 touchdowns, 290 passing yards, no interceptions, and throwing a 2-point conversion there to boot. 34.9 fantasy points, highest fantasy total for him. We have another guy to talk about that really excelled.
He's my guy.
Week. And it was in that game, even. That Ravens-Bengals game was high-scoring affair, 35-34. The Ravens won.
And the Bengals
team, too.
They missed out on their 2-point conversion to win.
Lots of high-scoring affairs there. Who was that top scorer? And would that be top scorer of the entire fantasy year?
I would not be surprised, but Jamar Chase.
Yeah, you can talk about that in his performance while I'm...
He had big-time stats. For the game, he had 11 receptions off of 17 targets, 264 yards, 3 touchdowns. So in our league, that scores just over 50 points. Really big game. You feel for the guy for having that kind of performance and having a loss to show for it. It basically discredits a lot of his effort. It's not his fault. He did everything he could. If that were a quarterback stats for passing, that would be a very good game. And the fact that he was a wide receiver is insane.
I think he's had the most in our format as well. I know in full PPR, he's had the most fantasy points in the game. In our league, Alvin Kamara was second with a 45-point week 2.
Yeah, back when we thought the Saints were actually good.
In full PPR, there's a surprise at number 2. He's not number 2 in our standard scoring, but in PPR, can you even venture a guess which wide receiver might be second for most fantasy points scored? I don't know. Guess it. There's a real outlier.
Maybe DK Metcalf?
No, he's Jawan Jennings.
Not on my radar.
Versus San Francisco, he had 46.5 fantasy points in PPR leagues. Chase comes in at number 1 and number 4 scorer.
Yeah.
He's had a couple real blow-up games there.
If we started the election process now, Jamar Chase would enter the picture as a legitimate third party.
Yeah, he was shut out, which was maybe a bit of a surprise, but if we had it today, I don't think he'd be shut out. He's really been a great scorer. He's just had a few less than stellar weeks mixed in there.
Everyone does.
It's been a rough year for wide receivers. My wide receivers are killing me. I'm happy with my team makeup, but I'm not happy with their production. I'd feel thrilled about these wide receivers if I didn't see their horrible production this year. CeeDee Lamb's been disappointing. Tyreek Hill, obviously disappointing. Yeah, just And now I'm sitting at 8th. I'm in danger of missing the playoffs. I've been trying to collect wide receivers who I feel like have underperformed their potential and will do positive regression to the mean here. You know, I got Tyreek Hill from Crunchy Leaves. I got Garrett Wilson from Worst Eater Around. I've held on to Deebo Samuel because I thought he was going to have some more positive regression, touchdown regression, and all my wide receivers are disappointing. My running backs, who I didn't even focus on, are doing great for me. I can't seem to buy a good wide receiver at this point. So with the trade deadline looming on Saturday, I'll probably just roll with who I have and hope for the best. I don't think I can gamble with improving the team from this point.
No, I agree with that. CD Lamb pick number 2 by you. Tyreek Hill pick number 3 by Crunchy Leaves. Garrett Wilson pick number 12 by Worst Eater. And then you picked Deebo Samuel in the second round, number 11. So of the first 24 picks, you have 4 wide receivers.
At one point, I had Brandon Ayuk. I had to cut him because he went to injured reserve.
Yeah. Where did Ayuk went 4th round, right?
Somewhere up there, though. Higher round.
4 of the top 24. That's like depressing to have that kind of team and be like, okay, I have a mediocre team based off of results.
Loading up on guys who were drafted highly but underperformed throughout the year, maybe not a viable strategy after all. Middle of the pack. I'm definitely not a lock for playoffs like I planned to be. I thought my plan at this point of the season was to be pretty much locked for playoffs so I could start focusing on guys with playoff upside. So then I could, if I wanted to do a last minute trade, maybe I'd get someone who's injured right now but would be back for the playoffs. Maybe I'd get someone who has a super easy schedule in the playoffs, but has had a rougher one to this point. But now I'm just not confident enough. Now I'm just like, okay, let's roll with who we got. Hope we make the playoffs and see what happens. I can't afford to go after Pacheco, who earlier I thought maybe I'd put out a trade for him from the Meg. Maybe we'll dive into this later. I'll look at some guys with easy schedules that could be interesting trade targets here at the very end. But I'm probably not going to be trying that myself, just because of the state of my team right now.
The quote-unquote easy schedules are not really as prevalent in terms of there's no 0-16 Detroit Lions. Even the not-so-good teams are not going to be, they're going to let up a bunch of points and be a disappointment, so therefore I'm going to try to find the teams that are going to be playing them twice in the last 2 months.
Bottom teams in terms of wins are the Jaguars and the Giants. They're not ones that I'm necessarily picking everyone up off waivers to throw into my lineup just because they're facing those teams.
And then you have the Cleveland Browns, 2-7, Vegas Raiders, 2-7. I think really when you're looking at teams like the easy schedule, you'd be looking at teams that are playing Las Vegas Raiders, Carolina Panthers. I'm looking at points against. Carolina Panthers have let up 310 points through 10 games. The Raiders have 251, Jaguars have 264. Surprisingly, the Bengals have let up 262 points this year, even though they have 4 wins. You got to put up a bunch of points if you're going to let up 262 points. Yeah. That is also the second most on the year behind the Panthers.
See, I wouldn't have guessed that. I guess it's just a story of offense versus defense. Their defense is lacking. But yeah, I wouldn't have pegged the Bengals to be number 2 on that list.
Yeah, on the points against. So I don't really see there being a ton of easy walkover teams because everyone else is a little bit more closely packed in terms of points against. Maybe it might matter more if you're like, hey, which defense do I need to pick up or drop? That might now be a little bit more of a reasonable thing to do.
Since we have kind of 2 weeks to cover, we'll cover it briefly. You looked at teams and who won 2, who lost 2. What are the highlights?
Mixon, a pretty good entering our last podcast, was number 1 in the standings, but went 0-2 in the last 2 weeks. So is now dripped down to number 2.
The spirit of my early season prediction about her team, that she'd be within 1 win plus points for of missing the playoffs, that has not gone my way. Her team's been great. But I will say, technically, she is now within 1 loss plus some points for of missing the playoffs. Only because all our teams are so close together. There's a lot of 5-5 teams there. 5-5 could have you out of the playoffs, and she's 6-4. So in the spirit of the prediction, it's not there, but on a technicality, it is there at that point.
I want you to clarify what you mean by with a couple points.
Okay, it's not
missing the playoffs. And a couple points is going to be just over 200 points. Will need to be the difference in order for
starters. Puts a bench of no one up there could have.
We can say
playoffs. I just said within one win or loss either way.
Okay.
I agree. It is not in the spirit of the prediction. It's on a technicality. But I'm surprised after her first
the season's not over too.
7 or so weeks. I am surprised as anyone that she's at 6-4 at this point.
So that's really the biggest one. Simple Jack and our co-host here went 0-2. That's maybe the second one, especially last week, how you were probably fading on Jaden last week.
Yeah, I mean, it was not a great game. I think it was a new low completion for him or close to it. I don't have too much to say about the game in specifics, but overall, it was a rough week for everyone who wasn't a running back on my team.
And Simple Jack also went 0-2. That means we had 3 teams go 2-0. Those teams were no Hart Thielens, which I was kind of surprised seeing going 2-0 with that team. Mitch went 2-0, and our new front runner in the standings, Wu-Tang Financial, went 2-0. Our final rundown of the actual current standings is Wu-Tang Financial at 7-3. Then we have Mixing It Pretty Good, No Hard Thielens, myself, Chase Me If You Can, Volume 2. Crunchy Leaves is taking up 2 through 5 at 6-4. And then you have Mitch, Worst Eater Around, No Fading on Jaden, Mintberry Crunch at the 5 through 9 spots, sitting at 500, 5-5. Then we have Under the Radar sitting at 4-6. Kind of needs probably 2 wins in order to actually make the playoffs there. Simple Jack mostly out of the playoffs, it looks like, but still at 3-7. And then we have the Meg at 2-8. I can't really say that mathematically the Meg is eliminated, but practicality, she's eliminated.
Yeah. She could finish the season,
6-8.
Ooh. I don't know the full matchups.
I would have a hard time believing that she's not mathematically eliminated, but it's pretty close. And then we were going to also talk about some of the trade transactions. Since we were talking about this, the trade deadline's coming up, right? We have 4 days until that's
November 16th. So I'm not sure when we'll have this posted yet, but basically we're going to be at the trade line once you're hearing about this or just before. So I don't know if we're going to see any more trades at this point, but I got my 5 in. Your hot take, picking me to have 5 trades, is done. So
woohoo!
I'm done. I just wanted to get the win for you.
I believe it. We've only had all 6 trades.
Us. Yes.
I think last year we had more trades.
I think so too.
And I'm surprised how these trades turned out.
So one thing I wanted to do is look through them, and we can use our hindsight to say off the cuff grade.
Yeah.
Who did better? And I haven't pre-thought this out, so it'll just be gut reaction. So maybe should we do it from first to last?
The first trade of the season?
Yeah. I had kicked off trades this season with my wife, the Meg, and I had sent her T. Higgins, Tyler Algier, and Tyler Bass in return for Chris Olave and Jake Elliott. I thought the kickers would be a slight boost for my end. I don't think it really worked out that way. Jake Elliott hasn't had that many opportunities this season comparatively. I think Tyler Bass probably worked out a little better, but pretty much that's a wash. Not a big deal. Really, it comes down to the T. Higgins versus Chris Olave thing with it. Tyler Algier wasn't someone I was going to keep, but he was a handcuff for her Bijan Robinson, so that was just to sweeten the pot for her. How do you feel about that one? I think both parties have a right to be disappointed. Injuries have been a problem.
Yeah, injuries were a problem, and honestly, I don't think T. Higgins has really shined the way I would have expected him to shine. Knowing Jamar Chase is the number 1 and he's number 2 on the depth chart, I would still expect him to be a decent performer. And from what I looked at, he did not really warrant having that much of an impact. He was injured, or is currently injured slightly.
He was
on and
coming off injury when I traded him, and he's injured again for 3 weeks now. He's still day to day.
He's only played 5 games.
Olave is with concussion now in IR. So that's the only reason I'd give the edge to the Meg receiving Higgins, because at least there's hope for him. But neither guy's been doing well. There's been a lot of low single-digit fantasy point games.
Yeah.
I think of the games they played, Higgins has outperformed Olave. But there's been a lot of games missed. So
yeah,
it's hard to say there's any winner there. I think it was the wash of a trade on both sides. But
in terms of value,
the Meg got Tyler Algier, which is a valuable handcuff for BJ.
Yeah, I feel like the value of the trade being even, I'd probably give it an A-, like a trade worth making. And then how did it actually turn out in terms of, did anyone really benefit, or was it something that made or broke one person's season? I would say no. So I'd be like a C. You could have not made the trade and probably been just as effective. So it's not like it killed you, so it's not an F. And it's also not an A because it didn't make your season or make Megan's season.
And one thing I do when I'm scouting trades, I throw it into this website, fantasy.com. And it helps me keep an eye on if it's relatively balanced or not. One thing it does is it doesn't really account for uneven numbers of players. So if I send 3 and receive 2 or vice versa, it almost always considers the side giving 3 to have been the stronger side, because it's just adding up individual player projected value. You can't look at that in a vacuum, but it does say that the side receiving Higgins, Algier, and Bass had a rating of 30, whereas the side receiving Olave and Elliott had a rating of 19. So it said this trade was imbalanced. But if you exclude one of the third players, it becomes a much more even trade. And in fact, it says it has Chris Olave with a 13.15 value and T. Higgins with 11.76. I don't even know if I agree with that in hindsight, but that's what it has it at. That's just one of many factors that I check when I'm trying to decide on whether to offer a trade or accept a trade. Another one is CBS's site has a fantasy trade value that it gives to each player. You can add those numbers up and see the total value of the package you're sending versus what you might receive. So I use those in conjunction to see if I'm in the right ballpark on a trade. When you're trading, do you use any tools, or is it just off of your own knowledge and feeling?
I do like typically the Yahoo evaluate this trade tool. And that just gives me an idea of, hey, does this benefit them in a way where, like, it helps me see it in a different perspective of, will this affect their starters? Will this affect my starters? Because when it comes down to it, if you're trading away starters and getting backups for, let's say you're getting rid of a starting wide receiver and getting a very good running back, but is a backup running back, that's not going to affect your starting lineup. So using the Yahoo evaluate this trade kind of just helps me verify that without looking through the roster intently, this is something that they might want to take, or is it something I'm overlooking of my own roster that I should second guess that or say no. It's not really the end all be all. So if it's like, hey, you're going to lose 2 fantasy points over the course of the remainder of the season, they're going to gain 5. That doesn't really mean much because I have a different opinion in terms of what those players are going to do.
It can't calculate the ease with which you could plug in someone off the waiver wire too. If you're trading away backup quarterback, it's going to say, oh no, you've lost 17 points from your weekly projection. But it's no, I'll just pick someone up to fill in that week. It's okay.
Yeah.
So I've done trades where I'm like, oh, minus 20, minus 30, because I have reasons for thinking that's not a true reflection of the value.
Yep.
Another thing I try to do is find players on other teams at a stacked position. So find a guy's 3rd or 4th running back that may be better than my 3rd running back. He might start on my team, even though he's benched on their team. So it's like unused, untapped value for another team, but maybe I've got a wide receiver that I can send them who could start for their team but isn't starting for mine. So if at all possible, there's not many players out there that would not start on someone's team but be startable on another unless your team is in really rough shape. If there are some, I try to find it. I know one guy out there that I have not traded for, but I've kept an eye on to see if I ever wanted to do it, was Tony Pollard. Whose team is that on? Mitch. So Mitchie Mitch is pretty stacked at running back with Saquon Barkley, Jonathan Taylor, Aaron Jones. And then he's got Tony Pollard just chilling on the bench most of the season. But Pollard's been really good.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't necessarily start him over any of those guys except maybe in special circumstances. So maybe he might be open to trading him, but I just haven't found the right deal for him. Pollard could start on my team in the third running back spot, in the flex spot. So yeah, that's the sort of stuff I look for, at least. I do that a lot of years. Haven't done it this year, but other years I've done it with quarterbacks. Sometimes people draft high on their quarterbacks. So they end up with two guys who are startable. That's not value that you're using every week. So let's make a trade and I can start the guy. Moving on, the next trade was between both of us. Mm-hmm. And this one is one that I feel pretty good about. I don't know how you feel, but I got Josh Jacobs from you and gave you Tank Bigsby and Xavier Worthy.
I feel less good about it now that ETN is coming back and being healthy, because now I don't know if I should be starting ETN or Bigsby. Bigsby also has a lingering, I think it was a hamstring injury. It's not something that's going to prevent him from playing, but it might prevent the number of reps he gets, which affects then his fantasy value of actually starting him. He helped me get over the mid part of the season and was a big part of my turnaround 1 and 2 to being where I'm at now, because he has scored some big points right after our trade. So I feel good about that. Xavier Worthy has been so-so. I figured he'd be a little bit more of an asset to me. I don't feel great about it, but at the same time, I don't feel bad about it.
Okay. After those first 2 weeks post-trade, I was like, oh man, it didn't work out for me because Bigsby was blowing up more than I thought. But
Josh Jacobs, though,
it's settled into what I was afraid of for Bigsby, that he and ETN would just be a little bit of a timeshare, hard to decide who's going to be better in a certain week. And lately, neither of them have been doing that great. And then Worthy has really underperformed my expectations. I thought he would be the better player long-term, and he hasn't been. But Josh Jacobs been a very fine starter for me. So I feel good about that one. I'll give myself an A on it.
I think you have to be very happy with it. For me, I'd probably give myself a B or B minus, because it still benefited my roster when I needed to get wins or to be able to keep myself in contention for playoffs and not fall too far behind. But throughout the remainder of the season, I might give myself a C, because Xavier Worthy is still capable of putting up points, and I'm not sure if Bigsby is going to return to that more prominent role over ETN long term. So that's where I think C is a reasonable grade. I would see myself at the end of the season, but up to this point, I'd probably give myself a B minus or maybe even a B.
Okay. Next one
was between you and Crunchy Leaves.
Disaster for me, but
it was a great one.
We'll never know what could have been. I traded DeAndre Swift and Chris Boswell for Brandon Ayuk and Brandon Aubrey. Let's exclude the kickers. Now there's some question marks with Brandon Aubrey.
With Dak being out.
With Dak Prescott being out the rest of the year, season-ending surgery. So I don't know about that. But let's focus on DeAndre Swift for Brandon Ayuk. My prediction for Swift is coming to pass. I thought he had a few continued boom weeks left. His schedule was really appealing in that block, and that's why I wanted to trade him high. Maybe I should have sat on him 2 more weeks to really eke out some more value. But for the most part, he performed well when I thought he performed well, and now his production's come back down as the schedule's been a little less favorable. That's been fine. It's about what I expected. Brandon Ayuk, it was an ACL tear, right?
It's either AC or MCL. It's one of the ligaments in the knee.
So he was out for this season immediately. So there's 0 value for me there, and that's just a hard knock.
Didn't even make it a full week.
But we'll never know if Ayuk would have returned to good production if he had just underperformed for a while or not.
I think for what we know that's going to happen for the rest of the season, you probably get an F, and I think Crunchy Leaves is probably going to get a C. Getting DeAndre Swift and Chris Boswell is not really a yay for giving up Brandon Ayuk.
When he should perform well.
Yeah, I would be pissed if I were you. I'd be not that happy if I were Chris. I was surprised to see that trade go down, and I was like, oh man, that's a weird one. I don't really understand it, but getting people to vote no or vote against it is going to be impossible in this league. So I didn't really.
For who?
I feel like Crunchy Leaves gave up way too much for that. So
you think he gave up too much? Yeah.
Oh yeah,
didn't work out that way at all.
Yeah, I'm just like, you know what? That's your guys' thing. I'm just gonna let it. Can't really get to veto it.
Debo Samuel has not taken advantage of Ayuk being gone.
No.
So I don't know if Ayuk would just look like Debo now, in which case it wouldn't have been a win either.
I think it would have opened
Debo's
up.
Been injured on and off a little bit, but even when he's been in, it's not great.
That's, I would say, F for you, C for Crunchy Leaves, or maybe even C- for Crunchy Leaves, because DeAndre Swift, I don't think is going to be really anything super happy to write about. So I think being a C might even be too generous. I'd probably go with C-.
Okay. Is this your trade next?
Yeah. I came up with it while we were actually recording our podcast that week. And I was like, on paper, this looks good.
This looks fair to me.
I wasn't sure if I was giving up way too much with the fact that Nick Chubb and Rico Dowdle, two known running backs, are going to be running back one, going to be good. And then I'd be getting back Tyrone Tracy Jr., who is unsure if he's going to take Devin Singletary's spot as running back one for the New York Giants. So there was some discussion that this was going to maybe happen. Sam Darnold being a backup quarterback, but I'm like, Jordan Love's already been injured once this year. They also hadn't had their bye yet. So I'm going to need someone for that spot. And I would like for it to be someone decent. He was the backup for worst eater around. So that was, I feel like, a reasonable idea. But at the same time, would it be worth giving up that much for Sam Darnold to be a backup quarterback? And then it kind of worked out because Jordan Love got injured again, but it was only for the rest of that game. And then came back and didn't really look himself. So I ended up starting Sam Darnold that week over Jordan Love. So it worked out really well for me. Puka Nacua has been okay. He's only played 2 games. He had one good game and one not very good game, which it's really too small of sample size to really judge on that one.
Did you receive him before week 8?
I had him for his first game back.
Okay, so he's had 3 games then.
I did not start him his first week back.
Gotcha.
Because I figured he was going to be limited on reps. It's not uncommon for players with injuries to sometimes get limited reps or give limited snaps. The fact that you had the questionable tag going into that weekend prompted me to say, I'm going to go ahead and pass on him. So for him actually starting for me, he got 1 reception for 11 yards in one game, and then 9 receptions for 98 yards the next game. So a mixed bag on that one, which is fine. But at the same time, I picked up Tank Dell off of waivers. I picked up Rico Dowdle off of waivers.
Yeah.
Nick Chubb was just coming back from IR when I traded him, so they weren't sure if he was going to get full reps or partial reps. Derek Carr was my backup, who had gotten injured, but was recovering. I think had just recovered from injury and not really shown anything interesting. So for me, there were questions, I think, on both sides of, is Tyrone Tracy going to be worth it? Is Nick Chubb going to be okay? Is Rico Dowdle actually going to get the carries for Dallas? That time, Stephon Diggs had already gone down for the rest of the year. Collins, Tank Dell are going to be 1 and 2 in terms of wide receivers in Houston. I feel like worst eater round, I'd probably say he got a B+, and I might have gotten like a C+. But now with the hindsight involved, I would give myself probably more of an A-, and he probably got a B+. I can maintain that B+.
It's hard for me to judge this one. There hasn't been anyone that's like a every week contributor in here yet. So it's 2 B grades for me, I think. I'd give you both Bs on it. But it's hard to pick a flat-out winner for me.
Yeah. After the trade was accepted, part of me was like, oh no, what did I just do? Because now I'm down to 3 startable running backs, down to...
Well, has Nick Chubb underperformed what you expected? Because you were kind of high on him. At least you were pitching him as really having good production when he comes back, most likely.
And he hasn't really
been there yet. Yeah.
No. But at the same time, I had J.K. Dobbins, Travis Etienne, Tank Bigsby, who are on the same team. And so when Etienne got back from injury, now I have to split. and then Tyron Tracy Jr. So those are my 4 running backs. Really, 2 of them are starting running backs. The other ones were splitting time. So now do I end up having to start a wide receiver in the wide receiver, tight end, running back slot? This is where I'm frustrated with having one less running back option, especially now that this week, going into this next week, New York Giants have a bye. So now I have to start Travis Etienne or Tank Bigsby, and I don't really know which one to start.
Yeah, that's a tough call.
That's my only drawback, I think, really, to my situation is now I've really limited myself in my options on running back. I feel like beyond this next week, Tyron Tracy Jr. is going to be the starting running back. Is RB1 in New York. I think he's cemented that. And Puka Nacua is going to be back to his old self. He's had 2 good games, 1 not good game, and that's okay. Then we have the next trade was between you and our commissioner.
Yeah, he sent me this one out of the blue. I was so surprised by it, and I was thrilled to receive it. I smashed the accept button on it, so to speak. Hasn't worked out as well as I'd hoped, but it's still worked out better for me than it has for him. I received Tyreek Hill. He received Amari Cooper. This was fresh off Amari Cooper being traded. I think it was 1 game removed from Amari Cooper being traded to the Bills. He had a good first game at the Bills, so there was some confidence there for Crunchy Leaves to want him. And Tyreek Hill had been languishing without Tua Tagovailoa in the lineup. Since, Amari Cooper has done nothing. He got 0.3 fantasy points, 2 targets, 1 reception for 3 yards, and he's been injured the other 2 weeks. So we'll see if he comes back and provides some more value for him. Whereas Tyreek Hill has been unimpressive, but startable.
Better than Amari Cooper.
Startable. 7.2 points, 8 points, 8.7 points. I'm not thrilled, but I can at least use him, which is more than I could say for Amari Cooper the past 3 weeks. Or most of the season, really. Amari Cooper's had 2 boom games this season, and the rest has been horrible. Yeah, those are 2 more guys that are just underperforming wide receivers. I don't know what's up with Tyreek Hill now. It's like you've got Tua back throwing to you. What's going on? Like, you're not the leading wide receiver on your team now. I don't have it in front of me on the targets, but he's not the leading target getter on his team at all. I would assume Jalen Waddle's ahead of him. And I think someone else is too, but I can't think who off the top of my head. I just don't know what's up with Tyreek Hill there. It may be getting too late for me to expect some positive touchdown regression. Maybe he only gets 1 touchdown every 5 games. I don't know. But it's pretty sad.
Yeah, that'd be really sad.
He got a touchdown last game, his 2nd of the year, and he got 8.7 fantasy points. You would think you'd get more, but he only got 16 yards that game. Yeah, it was rough. But I'm happy with the trade. I'm just not as over the moon as I thought I'd be.
Yeah, I feel like going into the trade, I would probably give you an A for that. Probably give Chris maybe a D+.
I didn't
in terms of going into it.
And his explanation was, I'm just so over Hill.
Tilting is not a good idea. I will say probably like post-trade, I probably say give you like a B on terms of value received, like the actual value that you've gotten from him, and maybe even an F for Chris. Yeah.
Thank you, Chris, for balancing out the horrible trade I got from you previously by giving me a little consolation prize there.
It's funny because we did give Chris a bunch of the flack for, I believe he dropped Tank Dell earlier in the season.
Yeah, you were able to take advantage.
And I picked him up, and then we criticized him. So this is his second quote-unquote podcast blunder.
Yeah.
I thought it was funny.
Yeah. And then the final trade we've had thus far in the season, I traded with Worst Eater Around. I was able to get Garrett Wilson, Derek Carr, and the Pittsburgh defense for Chris Olave, Tua Tagovailoa, and Kansas City defense. I viewed the Steelers as the top defense in the league, so I was targeting them. Kansas City had been on a good run, so that made them look appealing. The past 2 weeks, they haven't been as compelling of a defense. Pittsburgh's continued to be very solid on defense, so I feel good about that aspect. Derek Carr was just an unimportant piece for me. I've since dropped him when he didn't show much, and he was injured too. So really, it mostly comes down to Chris Olave and Garrett Wilson. Olave's on injured reserve after being disappointing most of the season. I feel like I won that one by a little bit. Garrett Wilson's a little tough to predict, but he's had enough boom weeks in there that I'm starting him. He's got some busts as well, but overall, I'm happy to have got him in that trade. B+ on that one for me.
I think the biggest difference is going to just be the Pittsburgh versus Kansas City.
Do you think that's the biggest difference?
Yeah.
Chris Olave has provided nothing. So.
Maybe it's just because I believe so much in Chris Olave, and with Derek Carr being injured, it affected his performance.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm a little bit biased on that, but that's what my brain initially goes to, is the value of having Derek Carr healthy and Chris Olave healthy means he can actually generate points. I would give you the edge. I don't really know how to grade that, though, because I don't feel like there's a significant gain to where I can give it like an A or a B+ or something. So maybe I might say B or B- for you, and then for worst eater round, maybe a C, because
you're probably at C for him too.
Yeah, he has the ability of producing points when he's healthy and Derek Carr's healthy. Okay, cool. Like now that can become a thing, but you're hoping on a lot of different things.
I've been unable to find a blockbuster trade as far as actual results go. I'm just left swinging and missing on getting someone who's going to be a game changer for me. But through 5 trades, I've at least got some usable pieces that are upgrades over what I sent. But yeah, nothing that I'm like, oh yeah, this is going to win the season for me.
As they said in Band of Brothers, one foxhole is good as the next. So trying to guess who's going to be injured or who's not going to be injured. One player is going to be just as good as another. So try not to think about it too hard.
Yeah. So that's our trades. If anyone else wants to get another one, get them sent out ASAP because we're closing in on the deadline.
Or if you think we missed, like you didn't like our grade and you wanted to say the grade should have been different on some of these trades, let us know. We'll mention it next week.
One thing I will do, let me just bring it up here. This is with FantasyPros. They have a trade finder feature. And honestly, I don't get too much use out of this because I feel like it weights the tight end position way too much. And it just wants me to trade for all the tight ends.
Especially in this, because it's probably set up for more of a standard league or assessment. And then our league doesn't require a tight end specific.
But I do like checking out the easy schedules recommendations. So I can pull it up and see players that have easier schedules. It'll give me players around the same rank, and I can say plus or minus 5 spots from that player. If I put in Jaden Daniels, find players with easier schedules than him. I see Baker Mayfield's schedule is just to die for here. Week 11, I guess, bye. Week 12, Giants, Panthers, Raiders, Chargers, Cowboys, Panthers.
Great schedule.
I don't think there's any trade I can get done there because Mayfield is on mixing it pretty good, and
I think she's
good enough. She's not looking to trade anyone, probably. CJ Stroud also with a pretty good schedule here versus Cowboys, Titans, Jaguars, Dolphins, but then you get a hard one with the Chiefs and Ravens to end the year.
Is that during playoffs?
Yeah, through week 14 is regular season, and then you'd have 15, 16,
17 because we have 8 teams.
Through week 14.
Make it to the championship game.
I wouldn't love Stroud in the playoffs, but I love him the rest of the regular season. Then looking at some other schedules at running back, Jahmyr Gibbs has a pretty favorable schedule going up against the Jaguars, the Colts, the Bears. Got the Packers in there, Bills, Bears again, then 49ers.
You think that's a favorable or is that according to them?
It says it's a favorable schedule. I guess I am not as sold on it. It's not. It only has a +1 on it, so it's not a huge gain at all.
I'm surprised it classifies the Bears as being an easy team.
They don't have ones that are just nightmare matchups, so maybe it's just the total average of them helps. A couple other guys, according to this, at least with somewhat favorable schedules, are Breece Hall and David Montgomery, Kyron Williams as well. Those are guys that maybe someone wants to target last minute in our league if they're looking at schedules towards the end of the season.
Do you think David Montgomery is underrated?
He always seems underrated.
I was surprised that the Bears let him go.
At wide receiver, the list would change based on which wide receiver I chose. I'm choosing the ones higher ranked on my team. If I chose guys more toward the middle rank, it'd give me a different list of players to compare them to, because it's giving me players that it thinks are somewhat of a fair trade. But if I look here, I don't know why this seems wrong to me. I put in CD Lamb. Maybe his ranking has really dropped since Dak Prescott's gone down. But it says I could look at Calvin Ridley. His rank is a lot lower, I would think, but he's had a couple really good games in there. He has a pretty favorable schedule coming up. You got the Vikings, which isn't easy, but then you got Texans, Commanders, Jaguars, Bengals, Colts, Jaguars. So the couple Jaguars in there help for sure.
Yeah.
Malik Neighbors is also on this list, as well as George Pickens. Pickens has a couple tough games for playoffs, though. I would not want that playoff run with Pickens. You're looking at the Eagles, the Ravens, and the Chiefs. No, I'd avoid that.
And speaking of Neighbors, that's a name that I'm going to be looking for next year, is just keeping in the back of my mind Neighbors. He's had 1 or maybe 2 concussions this year, but when he has played, from what I remember, he's been a candidate to definitely be an impact player.
So yeah, that's the only other thing that I think is interesting to keep in mind. It's the time where you really may want to figure out what players are going to be active for you during playoff time if you're going to make the playoffs, which is an open question for me. You feeling good about playoffs?
I feel like I'm going to make playoffs. I'm 6-4. I've got a good amount of points and a decent roster. I play Crunchy Leaves next week. It's probably going to end up being a close one in terms of projections. Then I play you again, which I think is going to be maybe a little bit more tough. And then I play Mintberry Crunch and Wu-Tang Financial. My schedule's not super tough, but I do have over a game to spare because I have advantage on points amongst most of the people below me. The only person I don't have a points against advantage of is against Mitchy Mitch. Also, when looking at the Yahoo projections, it has me finishing 4th at 8-6. According to the current projections, it has me at 8-6, sitting in 4th place. I think that's reasonable. I think there's going to be a lot of people sitting at 8-6. It does have the same 8 people making the playoffs as there are currently. So there's no changes of who's participating going to the postseason, but it does change who is positioned where. I don't know if I really agree with who's going to be positioned where, but I feel confident that I'm going to make it.
I think it's going to come down to points for me. I think I'd be good to get 2 more wins out of the next 4 games. I might be in a stretch of going 0-4 here. These next 2 games, I'm up against Sarah, mixing it pretty good. And then you could easily lose both of those. Then I need to win out to have a chance and go 7-7 this season and hope that I have enough points to beat out another team without knowing who's facing who in the full matrix of matchups. I could see a 7-7 team making the playoffs, but also missing the playoffs. So I need to make sure that I'm scoring enough to slip in.
You don't have good matchups for most of the season. It's going to be tough. There's a chance that you're going to be playing to make the playoffs.
Yeah, for sure.
Like, to be like, loser goes home.
I'm not feeling too great right now. It's gone downhill for me.
To be fair, Mintberry Crunch, who's currently sitting in 9th, is playing No Hard Thielens, myself, and then for week 14, worst eater around. So
that's a hard matchup.
Those are all hard matchups, but then under the radar, I'm trying to see where they stack up. The worst eater around, Simple Jack, so that's probably going to be an easier win. You're going to have Crunchy Leaves and Mitchy Mitch. So that's a middle of the road schedule because most of us are separated mostly just by win in points. 1 win in points.
Mm-hmm. Sounds like I need to do a little mild collusion with Simple Jack here to get him a win over under the radar.
It's hard to do that because if you trade away something, you're not going to get it back.
I just met him to
okay.
Make sure he starts his guys. He's had a couple weeks of starting guys who are injured, so I think he's not entirely on top of it. Chris, message me if I'm wrong, but I feel like you're not checking it enough. You got Brian Robinson Jr. sitting on your lineup, and he's been injured. I need him to show up and get a win. For the most part, the top 8 are solidly ahead in points for. Simple Jack actually does have a decent number of points, just with 1,044 points to my 1,078. He's the only one out of the playoffs right now that has broken 1,000 points. this season, sitting at 3-7, so he's a couple wins back. That's going to be hard to make up. But yeah, we'll see. I guess I'm on the edge of, I'll make the playoffs, but it's definitely not a sure thing at this point. What else do we want to talk about tonight? I feel like we probably don't have time to really get into the games. We've talked so much of trades.
Now, especially covering 2 weeks of games. Did you do any research for like waiver wizard, like your awards?
It's going to be pretty quick because there weren't many that stood out, and that goes for both of these weeks. So back in week 9, you picked up Xavier Legette.
Legette.
Mitchie Mitch picked up TJ Hawkinson. No Hard Thielen streamed the Tennessee defense. I picked up Zach Charbonnet just to complete my set of handcuffs for all the running backs. No one stood out to me enough, so I didn't even want to give a waiver wire wizard award then. And looking at week 10, it's more of the same. Crunchy Leaves added Demarcus Robinson after 2 monster games, but he underperformed. Didn't do much for his team. I added Jalen Warren because I had to fill in a running back. I only had Chuba Hubbard available. I was going to have Jonathan Brooks, but then they held him out for yet another week. So I had no running backs to start, so I threw in Jalen Warren, and hey, he got me 10 points, so it worked out.
I think that's your waiver wire wizard right there.
And I think it is, because there wasn't much else to compare it to.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess I'll say just barely a waiver wire wizard award in week 10, but I'm not even sure if I'm hanging on to him at this point.
Does he bring you the value that you're looking for? I think that's enough to give you the award for that. Okay.
Yay! Chuckling up. As far as bench blunders, it was also nothing. I mean, Simple Jack keeps leaving inactives in. So I don't want to beat a dead horse there and just give it to him every week. Brian Robinson Jr., both of those weeks, wasn't active. Other ones in week 9, Crunchy Leaves didn't check at the last moment to see that Amari Cooper was going to be inactive. It was, I think, a game time decision or close to it. So he could have subbed in someone like Graham McLeod or Alec Pierce and done better. So maybe that could be a blunder, but it was a tough call. Like, it was right there at the end. And then other than that, it was just a little bit of coin flips for me. You had a tough one week 9. Xavier Worthy gave you negative points, but I can't fault the start there. Given your guys, I would have started him too. Yeah, so week 9, nothing too crazy for me.
Yeah, with Crunchy Leaves, the game was separated by just over 5 points. Playing McLeod would have given him an additional 11.6 points, but Antonio Pierce would have left him just short of that mark. It was like a 50-50, but I think you could still give it to him even if you would have started Antonio Pierce, just from the fact that would have been an extremely close game.
Alec Pierce, yeah.
Alec Pierce, not Antonio. Yeah.
No, Antonio. I'll give him the bench blunder. It was a tough one, being that it's so late, but given that it did make all the difference in the result, we'll give it to him. As for week 10, let's see. No Hard Thielens decided to stream the Giants against the bad Panthers team, which can sometimes work out. But I feel like she had a compelling start already in the Bills against the Colts, because the Colts are not a scary team this year. I would have just rolled with the Bills, and they would have gotten you about 25 points this time.
Yeah.
And the Giants only 10. Then she had a rough go with Nico Collins being a somewhat surprise inactive there on short notice. There were no other options to drop someone.
For clarification, on my other fantasy team, I have Nico Collins, and I was like, is he going to play? Is he not going to play?
Mm-hmm.
It's a late game. I'm going to go ahead and just sit him on the bench.
I had a mirror situation with Tyreek Hill this week, where it was game time decision, playing late Monday night. I would be screwed if he didn't play, but didn't make the difference for me, but it easily could have if he had scored another touchdown. It was more the defense. Crunchy Leaves this week left Alec Pierce on the bench, and he got 14 points. He's been so boom and bust that it's hard to make a consistent call. Worst eater around chose to start Cole Kmet instead of Sam Laporta. Tight ends are tough this year, but I, in general, want to see Laporta over Kmet.
It was not a game-changing. I won by almost 40 points.
Yeah. And then Under the Radar continues to struggle with the call of, do I start Aaron Rodgers or do I start Kirk Cousins? This past week, both of them did poorly. Rodgers looks washed up.
I think, didn't I say something about that?
Yeah.
During the draft?
Maybe the one that stood out to me most, and I think I will do the Bench Blunder Award for this, Mint Berry Crunch left Bucky Irving on the bench for 15 fantasy points instead of Javonte Williams, 0.7 points. I think I'd start Bucky Irving in general over Javonte Williams. Would you?
I'm not super familiar with either one,
Yeah.
so
And
it'd
this
be
is
hard for
just-
me to make that call.
Yeah. This is me looking at their production rather than being an avid watcher of their body of work. I'm just comparing past points and everything, and I'm like,
Yeah.
I haven't seen enough from Javonte Williams.
That's where I'd probably end up going, and seeing that one has given me more consistent double-digit points versus the other. I think starting Bucky would be the best way to go.
Williams, there's a lot of single and even low single-digit point games in there. Whereas, Bucky Irving, not as many, at least. Yeah, more double-digit games, as you've said. I don't know if the matchup was a concern, possibly. Irving against San Francisco can be a little intimidating.
Francisco's been a little off. I would have probably thought that was a little bit more favorable than going against Kansas City. My idea would be that Denver's likely to be behind, Kansas City's likely to be ahead, so therefore you're not going to see as many touches from Williams, whereas Tampa Bay and San Francisco, I think, is a little bit more of a heads-up matchup, especially with Christian McCaffrey maybe being limited. Therefore, it'd be a little bit more of we can have a good steady mix of running the ball, passing the ball.
Do you know what happened game script-wise or play with Javonte Williams this week? He's at least gotten carries. Like the past 4 weeks, he had 14 carries, 17 carries, 12 carries, and then this week, 1 carry. What happened there?
That's a good question.
I don't know why he had such reduced volume. And I don't see anything from the notes about him. Yeah. It's just a very quiet day. It doesn't even seem like the game got away from them. And the final score was a loss.
No, it's close.
14-16. Yeah.
I think they were winning a good chunk of the game.
Yeah.
Don't quote me on that.
Yeah. So I don't know. Maybe it's just that he's losing workload to other guys. The Chiefs, though, squeaking out another win. Has there been a less intimidating, undefeated 9-0 team? They're clearly a good team. I'm not saying they're bad.
Yeah.
I'm just surprised they're 9-0. I saw something on ESPN today. The Chiefs plus 58-point differential for the whole season is the lowest in NFL history among 32 teams to start 9-0.
I believe
they're
that
just barely outscoring the teams they're beating.
They've a lot of close games.
How long can they keep it up? They're facing the Bills this week.
The Bills also haven't really looked super convincing. Kansas City didn't look super convincing. And I feel like both of those things are true this year. The only difference is Kansas City has scored 58 more points than their opponents. This more. Yeah. And last year, I believe Kansas City, I was shocked that Kansas City looked so bad. Not to say that their record was super bad, but at the same time, it's Kansas City. I was expecting more out of them. And then this year, I didn't expect that much out of them. And they're 9-0, and they somehow been disappointing in a way. I don't know how that works, but whatever.
I was looking up the odds on them. And despite the fact the Chiefs are unbeaten, the Bills are favored in that game by 2.5 points. I'm not over the moon about the Chiefs, but I'm not about the Bills either. So I'll go against the odds and say the Chiefs go 10-0 and beat the Bills this week. It's not a super hot take, but I've lost my swagger on hot takes, having lost a couple of them.
It's gotten harder to take a hot take as the season's gone on.
Yeah.
I feel like in the early part is easier. Through week 9 last year, Kansas City was 7-2. So they were not that bad, but they did fall off later in the season and ended up 11-6, losing 4 of their last however many games. That is what stuck into my brain, was the fact that they lost a lot after their bye week, making it feel like they were underperforming. Man, hot take. Can I just double down on my current playoff picture?
It's already in the books, so
I can double down, right?
I don't know if it counts as a separate one. I'm looking at the AFC playoffs and trying to pick the wildcard teams. If it all shakes out with the division leaders, we have a few that are looking to be wildcard potentials. We got Broncos at 5-5. The Broncos are 3rd in the AFC West right now, but they have a legitimate shot. You got the Bengals at 4-6. I'm kind of rooting for them just
I think the Bengals should make the playoffs.
Yeah.
I didn't
and
see
you got
their
the Colts that have a chance too, but I'm less confident about their odds. How many wildcards teams do we get now?
Their total 7 teams, so 3 wildcard spots.
3 wildcards. Okay, so there are actually spots for all of them. I don't feel like the Colts are going to make it, but let me pull up the standings.
Yeah, the Bengals play Pittsburgh twice, play the Chargers once, play Tennessee, Dallas, Cleveland, Denver.
The Ravens are going to be a lock for a wild card if they don't.
Oh yeah,
you got Steelers and Ravens both in the North, so one of them is a wild card. You want to pick 2 of the next 3 teams?
So yeah, I'll say the Bengals, the Chargers.
Chargers look pretty good for it too.
I have a hard time saying the Broncos.
You have a hard time saying them,
but at the same time,
you got Ravens for sure, Ravens or Steelers.
Okay,
you got Ravens. So, does that mean it's Bengals?
Ravens, Chargers, Bengals. Those are my wild card.
I like it. Okay, I'll put you down for that one. That's interesting. I think Ravens, Chargers look good. Maybe Steelers will even end up being the wild card. Who knows? For me, it's between Bengals and the Broncos. It's
on the
between Bengals
side,
and Broncos because I don't see the Colts doing it.
No.
And the Bengals have to make up a win here. The Broncos are 5-5.
They do.
I do think they're the better team.
Their schedule is not super easy with the Steelers twice, but it does get easier because you also play the Cowboys, who I think are overrated, have not figured out how they want to play football, and also now with no longer having Dak Prescott for the rest of the season. Tennessee Titans, who have struggled all year, and you also have the Cleveland Browns, who just have not looked good whatsoever. So you have, I would almost see 3 wins, a maybe win against the Broncos, so 4 wins, and then you have to figure out, are you going to win a game against Steelers and Chargers? So I think I'm hopeful for the Bengals.
Yeah, I'd like to see that. The Broncos don't excite me as much.
Yeah, and the NFC, man, I can't believe the Cardinals are 6-4. They don't feel like a 6-4 team.
No, they don't.
But the big thing is that they're the leader of the division, but San Francisco is only 1 game back.
Without looking it up, I would have thought San Francisco was leading the NFC West.
I knew the San Francisco 49ers had a tough start to the season because they had no Christian McCaffrey.
Yes.
He's back. I think the wildcard teams are going to be Vikings, Packers. I'm probably going to say Commanders. If the Vikings end up passing the Lions, then the Lions being like basically 3 NFC North teams between the Lions, Vikings, and Packers, and then Commanders.
So who gets left out? Cardinals or 49ers?
I thought we were just talking about wildcard teams.
One of them's not a wild card. That means one of them's left out.
I think 49ers pass the Cardinals.
I hope they do.
Because Christian McCaffrey is back now.
Yeah.
You have Seahawks, which I think is not as hard of the game. The Seahawks do a good job of battling, but with Christian McCaffrey back, I can't see that being a loss. Packers is going to be probably a close game. Bills is probably going to be a close game. The Bears are probably going to destroy the Rams. Just depending on what the Dolphins do, I'm not 100% sure on that. Probably going to get destroyed by the Lions, and I think they're going to beat the Cardinals. Cardinals, they have Seahawks, which they're going to win. Vikings, I think they're going to lose. Seahawks, again, they're going to win. Patriots are going to win. That's going to be down to the wire because they play the Panthers, Rams, 49ers. That is a close one, but I still think the 49ers are going to win it. They have a better chance of upsetting someone versus being upset, whereas I think the Arizona Cardinals have a higher chance of being upset than upsetting a team they're not supposed to win against.
Is your hot take just for AFC or NFC?
We'll make two hot takes, separate them.
What's your NFC wildcards again?
3 of the 4 NFC North teams are going to get in there. So whether the Lions are the NFC North winner or the Vikings are going to be NFC North winner, regardless, 3 of those 4 teams are going to make it. The Commanders are going to be the other team, with the 49ers probably being the winner of the NFC West.
I didn't even realize the Packers were also in 3rd in their division like the Broncos.
They're right now sitting in playoff spot by themselves at 6-3.
Only 3 losses. They've had their bye already.
But yeah, they just had their bye, so.
Yeah. You're looking pretty good. I think those are some solid hot takes. We have the trade deadline looming. Are you looking for any more trades?
I would like to make one trade, but I don't see how it's going to work out. So I think I'm going to end up being done. I have my final roster.
Yep. I think my roster is what it is at this point. I can only close my eyes, hold my nose, hope for the best for the rest of the season. See how it goes.
May the force be with you.
That's it for this episode of the Smashville Fantasy Football Podcast. As always, we have aspirations of adequacy, so come back and we'll try to do a bit better next time. Who knows, we may even reveal that one sneaky trick guaranteed to win your fantasy league. But until then, keep those trades rolling and get your lineup set before kickoff. See you next week.